Have you ever looked at someone's financial decision and thought, that's insane? Maybe they spend all their money on lottery tickets. Maybe they refuse to invest in stocks, or maybe they work long hours in jobs you'd never accept. But here's the truth. No one is crazy with money. Everyone's choices, whether they look smart, stupid, or irrational, make perfect sense to them because of the world they grew up in.
That's crazy money behavior.
Oh, absolutely. Or even, let's be honest, look back at our own past decisions sometimes.
Totally. I think we've all been there wondering, what was I thinking?
It's that immediate reaction, that snap judgment when something just doesn't line up with how we think about money.
Exactly. But today we're going to kind of challenge that. In this deep dive, we're looking at chapter 1 from the sources you sent over, and it's got this great title, Crazy Money.
Mm-hmm. Provocative.
Right. And our mission here is to really get underneath that initial judgment. We want to unpack the core psychological stuff, about how people relate to money.
And pull out the key themes that shape how we see the financial world.
Yeah, and then this is the crucial part, I think. Develop some practical, empathetic ways to actually work with people, especially when their money mindset seems, totally different from yours.
And this isn't about pointing fingers or judging. It's really about understanding.
Yeah.
We're diving into that core idea from the chapter. People do some crazy things with money, but no one is crazy.
That's such a powerful statement. It really reframes things, doesn't it?
It does. It asks us to look past the action itself and try to figure out the why behind it.
So why should you, listening right now, care about this? Well, by the end of our chat, hopefully you'll have a clearer, maybe more compassionate way to look at your own money habits, and definitely those of others.
Recognizing those deep, often hidden influences that really drive those decisions.
Okay, let's jump in. The central idea. People do some crazy things with money. But no one is crazy. How does that really challenge us right off the bat?
Well, what's fascinating is how it immediately shifts the focus. It moves away from just labeling something crazy and towards trying to understand the logic behind it.
The logic, even if it looks completely illogical from the outside.
Exactly. The chapter argues that pretty much every financial decision, no matter how strange it looks to us, makes sense to the person making it in that moment. It's all about their unique mental model, their internal map of how the world works, which has been built up piece by piece over their entire life.
So it's not just like differing opinions, it's like people are running different financial software based on totally different life experiences.
That's a great way to put it. What seems completely irrational or even irresponsible to one person might feel perfectly logical, even necessary to someone else.
Why? Because their starting points are just worlds apart.
Precisely. They're operating from completely different reference points built on these vastly different lived experiences.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But how do these incredibly different reference points actually get created? What builds those foundational beliefs?
This is where it gets really interesting. This chapter really hammers home the idea that experience is the most powerful teacher.
More powerful than, say, education or reading about finance.
Way more powerful, according to the argument here. Think about it. People from different generations, raised by different parents with different money habits, growing up in different economic climates, experiencing different job markets, maybe having different amounts of just plain luck.
Yeah.
They all learn profoundly different lessons about how money works, what risk means, what security feels like, and what you've personally lived through is just far more convincing. It sinks in deeper than anything you just hear about or read in a book.
Wow. So you're saying my own little slice of financial experience, even if it's like 0.000000001% of what's happened globally.
Right.
That tiny slice could make up maybe 80% of how I actually think the world works financially. That's kind of staggering.
It absolutely is. And it explains so much disagreement, doesn't it? It means two equally smart people, maybe with the same education level, can fundamentally disagree about investing or recessions or what's truly important financially.
Not because one is smarter, but just because their life experiences have given them completely different but equally valid perspectives.
Exactly. Their experiences feel equally persuasive to them. Just think about the difference between someone who grew up in real poverty versus the child of, say, a wealthy investment banker.
Totally different worlds, totally different lessons about risk and security.
Or someone who lived through periods of really high inflation, watching prices spiral, versus someone who grew up when prices were mostly stable.
Right. Or the examples given, the stockbroker wiped out in the Great Depression versus a tech worker in the late 90s feeling like stocks only go up.
Or even geographically an Australian who hasn't lived through a major recession in 30 years versus, well, pretty much any American who has seen several booms and busts.
It's a really vivid contrast, but it raises a question for me. Can we truly understand these different realities just by, reading about them or trying to be open-minded?
That's a key point the chapter makes. It draws a really crucial distinction. No amount of studying, no amount of trying to be empathetic can genuinely recreate the feeling, the raw power of fear and uncertainty that comes from actually living through something difficult.
So I can read about the Great Depression.
Right, you can study the statistics, read the accounts.
But I won't have the emotional scars. I won't feel that deep-seated anxiety about losing everything.
Exactly. And conversely, someone who did live through that might look at someone today confidently investing in stocks and think they're the crazy ones. We just see the world through completely different emotional lenses shaped by experience.
There's that quote mentioned from Frederick Lewis Allen about how the Depression marked millions of Americans inwardly for the rest of their lives. That really captures that lasting emotional impact.
It does. And then you contrast that with someone like JFK, whose family actually did well during the Depression. His understanding of it was purely academic, learned at Harvard, completely detached from the lived suffering.
It's a stark difference.
It really is. As investor Michael Batnick puts it, and the chapter quotes this, "Some lessons have to be experienced before they can be understood." And we're all kind of victims or beneficiaries of that truth in our own ways.
Okay, that makes a lot of intuitive sense. But is there, scientific backing for this? Does data show that our early experiences really anchor us?
Yes, absolutely. The chapter points to a major study by economists Ulrich Malmendier and Stefan Nagel. They work with the NBER, the National Bureau of Economic Research,
Okay.
and they dug into 50 years of data from something called the Survey of Consumer Finances. It's a really detailed look at how Americans manage their money over time.
And what did they find? Did it connect personal history to later decisions?
It did, very clearly. They found that people's investment decisions throughout their lives are heavily anchored to the economic conditions they experienced early in their adult lives.
Can you give an example?
Sure. If you came of age during a time of high inflation, you were significantly less likely to invest heavily in bonds later in life, even when inflation was low.
Because you remembered bonds getting eaten away by inflation.
Presumably, yes. That negative experience stuck. And conversely, if you grew up when the stock market was doing really well, you're more likely to invest more money in stocks later on, regardless of the current market climate.
Wow.
Their conclusion was pretty direct. How much risk individual investors are willing to take depends profoundly on their personal history.
So it really boils down to, as the chapter puts it, maybe less about intelligence or education and more about the dumb luck of when and where you were born. That feels huge.
It is profound. And it echoes what figures like Bill Gross, the famous bond investor, have said. He acknowledged that a huge part of his success came from the timing being born when he was starting his career just as interest rates began a decades-long decline.
Making bonds look amazing during his prime investing years.
Exactly, like wealth-generating machines, as he put it. But his father's generation, who saw high inflation, they might have seen bonds as wealth incinerators. Same asset, totally different perception based on lived history.
And this idea of dumb luck, or just timing, isn't only about massive events like the Depression, right? It applies on a smaller scale, too.
Oh, definitely. The chapter highlights how different things can be for people born just, say, 20 years apart, even in the same country.
Like with the stock market.
Yeah. Someone born in 1970, during their teens and 20s, really formative years, they saw the S&P 500 go up almost tenfold, even after adjusting for inflation. Imagine the lesson you learned from that.
You'd probably think stocks are a pretty great bet.
Right. But someone born in 1950, during their teens and 20s, the market basically went nowhere after inflation. Flat.
So they'd likely have a much more cautious, maybe even skeptical view of the stock market.
Exactly. Two groups, living in the same country, potentially equally smart, but carrying completely different mental models of how the stock market works, just based on the timing of their youth.
And what about something like inflation? That feels very personal.
Absolutely. If you were born in the 1960s in America, your teens and 20s were marked by inflation tripling prices, gas lines, shrinking paychecks.
Yeah.
That leaves a mark.
Yeah, you don't forget that easily.
But someone born in, say, 1990, Inflation has been so low for most of their conscious life, it's probably barely registered as a major concern. It's just not part of their lived financial reality in the same way.
The chapter also mentions those stark unemployment differences, right? Like in 2009.
Yeah, that was striking. Nationwide unemployment hit 10%, which is bad. But for young African-American men without a high school diploma, it was almost 50%. 50.
Unbelievable.
While for, say, Caucasian women over 45 with a college degree, it was around 4%. These are just different numbers. They're different universes of economic experience happening at the same time in the same country.
It really drives home how varied individual realities can be.
And then you zoom out globally. Imagine being in Germany or Japan after WWII. Your stock market wiped out, food scarce, compared to the US at the same time where the economy was booming and the stock market doubled.
It seems completely unreasonable, then, to expect everyone to react the same way to financial advice or opportunities.
Totally unreasonable. Their fundamental assumptions about safety, risk, trust in institutions, they're all forged in these vastly different fires.
So this all leads back to the idea that every decision, even the ones that look completely crazy from our perspective,
has a narrative behind it. Yes.
Yeah.
People take the information they have, plug it into their unique mental model shaped by all these experiences we've been talking about, and make a decision that makes sense within that story.
They tell themselves a story that justifies the action based on their reality.
Exactly.
Can you give another example of that? Where an action seems baffling until you understand the underlying story or perspective.
Well, the chapter brings up that story about the Foxconn factories in China. The New York Times reported on what seemed like terrible working conditions, and American readers were, quite upset.
Right, I remember that.
But then there was this comment shared from the nephew of a woman working there. And he said his aunt actually saw the Foxconn job as an improvement over her previous option, which might have been something like prostitution.
Wow. That really shifts the perspective, doesn't it?
Dramatically. It shows how what seems obviously wrong or exploitative from one perspective can look like progress or the least bad option from another, based entirely on the alternatives available and the experiences shaping that choice.
That's a really powerful illustration. Okay, let's talk about something maybe closer to home for many listeners. Lottery tickets.
Yes, the numbers are pretty wild. Americans spend more on lottery tickets than on movies, video games, music, sporting events, and books combined.
And who's buying them mostly?
It's predominantly people in lower income groups. The chapter cites that the lowest income households spend, on average, about $412 a year on lottery tickets.
Which is 4 times what the highest income groups spend. And this seems, it seems crazy to a lot of people, right? Especially when you hear that statistic that 40% of Americans couldn't cover a $400 emergency.
Exactly. On the surface, it looks completely irrational. Why spend money you desperately need on something with astronomically low odds of paying off?
Yeah.
But as the chapter suggests, if you just strain a little, try to see it from their perspective. Maybe you're living paycheck to paycheck. Saving feels impossible. Getting ahead seems out of reach. Your wages aren't really going up.
Okay.
For that person, buying a lottery ticket might be the only time they feel they have a tangible shot, however small, at getting the good stuff they see others enjoying. A reliable car, a safe place to live, freedom from financial stress.
So it's not just about the money. It's about buying hope, a dream.
Exactly. You're paying for the dream. You're paying for that brief moment of possibility of imagining a different life. From that perspective, within that narrative, it starts to make a different kind of sense, even if the odds are terrible.
That phrase, what you're doing, seems crazy, but I kind of understand why you're doing it. That really seems to capture the essence of this chapter. It's about finding that underlying why.
It really is. And there's another crucial layer to why money decisions are so hard and why we see so much misbehavior.
What's that?
It's simply that so many of the financial tools and concepts we grapple with today are incredibly new in the grand scheme of human history.
New. But money's been around for ages, right?
Money itself, yes, thousands of years. But think about things like retirement planning. Saving specifically for decades of life after work. That's a really recent idea.
How recent?
The whole concept of being entitled to a comfortable retirement is maybe 2 generations old, tops. Before World War II, most Americans just worked until they died. Social Security started small.
Huh. I never really thought about it that way.
The idea that you should diligently save and invest for your own retirement really only took widespread hold in the 1980s. And the main tools we use, the 401k wasn't even invented until 1978. Seriously. And the Roth IRA. That came along in 1998. It's barely old enough to legally drink, as the chapter jokes.
Wow. Okay, so we're expecting people to be experts at using tools that are, historically speaking, brand new inventions.
Pretty much. Think about college financing, too. The number of people going to college exploded after WWII, and tuition has skyrocketed. Student loans on the scale we see them now. There's no deep, multi-generational wisdom on how to handle that. We're the first couple of generations really dealing with it en masse.
And things like index funds, credit cards.
Index funds are less than 50 years old. Hedge funds really only became a big thing in the last 25 years. Widespread consumer debt mortgages for the masses, credit cards, car loans that largely exploded after WWII with things like the GI Bill.
So it's like we're all beginners.
In many ways, yes. We're all newbies navigating this relatively new, complex financial world. We haven't had centuries to adapt our behaviors and instincts.
So it shouldn't be a surprise that we often struggle or make decisions based more on emotion or limited experience than on cold, hard facts.
Exactly. We're not crazy. We're just inexperienced in the face of a rapidly changing system.
Okay, this has been incredibly insightful. Understanding that no one is crazy, that experience reigns supreme, and that the whole system is pretty new. What does this mean for us practically?
Yeah, how do we take these insights and actually use them? Especially if you're in a role where you work with people around money, or even just trying to understand friends or family.
Right. If no one is crazy, how do we approach those behaviors that still look crazy from our viewpoint?
This leads us nicely into developing a set of actionable qualities, ways of thinking and acting when dealing with others about money. The chapter provides a great foundation for this, shifting us away from judgment and towards being more effective.
Okay, let's break down these qualities for working with people. What's the starting point?
The absolute foundation is empathy first. Before you judge, before you advise, make a real effort to see the situation from their unique perspective. Try to understand their world.
So step into their shoes, acknowledge their reality as valid for them, even if it's different from mine.
Precisely. And building on that, the second quality is respect experiences. Actively recognize that someone's background, their upbringing, the specific events they've lived through, these things powerfully shape their financial thinking, their tolerance for risk, even their work ethic. Don't dismiss that history.
That feels really important. We often just assume everyone's working with the same mental toolkit.
Which leads to the third point. Don't assume uniform logic. What motivates you or what seems logical to your peer group might be completely irrelevant or even counterproductive for someone else.
So no one-size-fits-all solutions. You have to tailor the approach.
Absolutely. Which requires the fourth quality. Listen to their story. Remember that narrative we talked about? Every financial decision fits into a personal story. To work effectively, you need to actually hear that story, understand their why.
And hearing that story helps with the fifth quality, right? Which is be non-judgmental.
Exactly. Once you start to understand the story, the context, the experiences, it becomes much harder to judge. What looks crazy might actually be a strategy for survival, or a way of finding hope, or maybe just managing immense stress, all rooted in their reality.
This really changes the dynamic from fixing someone to understanding them.
It does. And that understanding informs this sixth quality. Adapt communication. Don't just throw financial jargon at people. Explain concepts using examples and language that actually connect with their lived experiences. Make it relatable.
Okay, and what about the fact that this stuff is all so new?
That ties into the seventh quality. Patience with learning. Remember, retirement planning, complex investments, managing debt. These are new skills for humanity. Don't expect people to become experts overnight or to instantly change habits they might have had for decades. Be patient.
Patience and understanding seem key to building trust.
Which is quality number 8. Build trust through understanding. People will only listen to you, work with you, consider your advice if they feel genuinely seen and understood. Acknowledge their struggles, validate their history, then you can potentially help.
So once you have that trust, how do you guide them without just telling them what to do?
That's the 9th quality. Encourage, but don't force change. You can gently guide people towards potentially better habits or different perspectives, but recognize that deeply ingrained behaviors rooted in years of experience are incredibly difficult to shift. You can't force it. You can only encourage and support.
It's a partnership, not a dictatorship.
Well put. And finally, the 10th quality is create shared goals. Instead of imposing your definition of financial success, focus on universal human needs, things like security, dignity, providing for family, having opportunities. Find common ground that resonates with their personal narrative and goals.
These qualities really paint a picture of working with someone, respecting their journey, rather than just applying generic financial rules to them. It's about compassion and context.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the messy, human, experience-driven reality of how we all relate to money.
Wow. This deep dive has really driven home how personal our financial beliefs are. They're not just opinions. They're forged in the fires of our individual experiences, many of which other people just can't see.
And realizing that no one is crazy, that everyone is just responding logically to their own unique life lessons. That can genuinely change how you see your own finances, and definitely how you interact with others about theirs.
It really can.
The chapter ends with a thought that sort of sums it all up, a really humbling reminder. We all think we know how the world works, but we've all only experienced a tiny sliver of it.
That's powerful. So maybe the question for you to think about this week is, what does that insight tell you about the financial assumptions you hold? How might understanding your own anchors, your own unique experiences, change how you move forward with your money?
Definitely something worth mulling over.
So the next time you see someone making a financial choice that looks crazy, pause. Remember this: no one is crazy. They're simply responding to the world they know, the experiences they've lived, and the stories they tell themselves to survive. If this perspective opened your eyes, hit that like button, subscribe for more psychological money insights, and share this video with someone who needs to hear. We all do crazy things with money, but in reality, no one is crazy. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.